Good afternoon. This is a video about a review for my new book, which is called Marthe. But before I do that, I would mention that there are two other books that I wrote, and I want to give them a mention because the very first book I wrote is this book here, and I'm sorry the camera is backwards. It actually says "Love always wins," and in my language, Punjabi, love is pyar, and to always win is jeet. So pyar jeet is love always wins, and pyar jeet was the name of my baby daughter. I named her that. Pyar jeet was severely disabled. She was paralyzed from the left side of her body. She was blind, couldn't sit up, she couldn't speak. She only had hearing on one side. She couldn't chew, so I had to chew the food for her and put it in her mouth. I looked after her 24 hours a day, and I wrote this book. I can't read anything from this book. This book is just impossible for me to read. Anyway, with all that happening and everything else in my life at the time, I'd had enough and I wanted out. I decided that I would end my life. I made 14 attempts. No, not many people make that many attempts. And you'd think that somebody who's made 14 attempts and is still alive after each one is not very competent at committing suicide. But my attempts were all serious. Every single one of them would have killed me. But something intervened. I don't know if it was God or if it was divine. But each time, something saved me. And I'll give you just one example. Because I was suicidal and because they knew that I was trying to end my life, I was hospitalized in a secure unit. But they can't keep you there forever. So what they do is they tend to release you for a night, and so you would pretend that everything was fine and, you were no longer suicidal, and they would send you home for a night. And then you could go about and make your attempt. So one night, I thought, well, how am I going to do it? Well, I can't swim. How about jumping into the River Thames? Now, to my knowledge, the deepest part of the river was near the Woolwich Ferry. I don't know how many of you know London and the Woolwich Ferry, but there's like a brick wall, a concrete barrier, and down there on the other side, so many 20, 30 feet down, you've got the river. Once you're over that wall, you can't come back out, right? And if you can't swim, that's it. Once you've jumped, you've made your commitment, and you can't change your mind. And the best time was midnight, when there's no one there. The ferry is closed, deserted, so I drove down there, and I thought, that river looks black, it looks scary. So I think I'd close my eyes. So I closed my eyes, and I jumped. And I landed very heavily on the bank, the mud bank. The tide was out, so there's no water. I broke my ankle. And then I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'll just sit here and wait for the tide to come back. Then I thought, well, first the tide's going to touch my feet, then it's going to go up to my waist, then my shoulders. Oh, no, I want a quick death. So I looked for some steps and found some steps and went back, hobbled back up to the car, my mobile phone, and I called the hospital and they sent an ambulance and the police who took my car. That was just one of the attempts, right? Another time I took about 100 tablets that are notorious for suicide. They've actually stopped selling them now. You could get them over the counter. Coproximol was the name of the medicine. You can't buy it anymore because too many people use it for suicide. And I took 100 coproximol tablets. And I knew that, they would kill me. As I was taking the last lot of coproximol, a friend of mine had a key to my flat. and he walked in, and he stood there, and I didn't see him, and he watched me take the tablets, and he wondered what I was doing at first, but then he realised what I was doing. He came in and he said, "What the F are you doing?" And caught me. He called an ambulance. Right, the paramedics came and said, "We've got to take you to hospital." And I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm okay." They looked in the bin and there were the empty packets. So they said, "No, we've got to take you to hospital." And I said, "No, look, I'm all right." Finally, after about half an hour of arguing with them, I thought, well, the tablets have gone down in my stomach now, so now, it doesn't matter. I'll go to the hospital. So I walked into the ambulance, and I'm sitting there, and there were guys looking at me, looking at me, looking at me. And all of a sudden, I came across Dizzy, and he said, "Do you want to lie down?" And I said, "Yes." And he laid me on the stretcher, and that's all I remember. I just remember him thumping on the window and the sirens going, on the ambulance. And I woke up 3 weeks later in intensive care in Lewisham Hospital, and then found myself back in the secure unit again. 14 suicide attempts. Now, why is this book so important? Right? My life at that time, I didn't think could be any worse. I didn't think anyone could have a worse life. I'd had my sons die. I lost my sons. Biagi was born severely disabled. I was in a custody battle for her because her mother wanted her as a meal ticket, for the benefits and housing and everything. But I'd given up my job to care for her 24 hours. And because she was a baby, the courts tend to favor the mother. And I was losing that battle. And I couldn't bear to be parted from my daughter. I felt that, the mother wouldn't look after her as well or as intensely as I could. And it was an impossible situation, but love always wins, and I survived. So I wrote this book for the benefit of people who are depressed and maybe going through that same sort of hell, to give them this message that there's always hope and that you can survive, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that 20 years ago, my life meant nothing. Now, I own a big house without a mortgage. I have 2 cars. I'm a successful artist and a writer, and I'm very happy. I'm a very happy person. I've got my life back. And if I can do it, so can you. That's why this book is important. All the money from the sale of this book went to the hospital that saved my baby's life. So Love Always Wins is an important book. It's out of print now. It's 100 pages. It's not a very thick book. But I think it's important that the book be republished. I own the copyright, so it's a very important piece of work. I think it's a gift to society if it can be interpreted like that. I want people to know that you too can win. I'm not going to read any excerpts from it because it's just too much for me to read. I can't do it. I do apologize. If you buy the book when it's republished and you read it, I think you'll understand that I've had half a dozen people that I know who read the book, and they told me that they cried all the way through. I've had people tell me that they've read this book 5 times. So I'm not going to say any more than that. It's Love Always Wins, a father's story. That's the first part of the video. My phone's got very limited memory, so I'm going to have to do the review in stages. So this is the first stage of the review. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Oh, good, you're still watching. Okay. The second book was this book, and it was called Marthe, The Unknown Child in the Very Old Victorian Photograph. I used to buy and sell old photographs as a business, Victorian photographs, particularly the death photographs. The Victorians didn't have mobile phones and cameras like we do today. Having a picture taken was very expensive. It took all day to take a photograph. So, the people couldn't afford it. It wasn't done. It was only done on very particular occasions. And there was this sort of habit of what we call memento mori, where a family member died, and the family would have a photograph taken of them post-mortem uh, as a souvenir to remember them. And these photographs, they sell for quite a lot of money. There are millions of photographs in collections all over the world, and I saw a business in buying and selling them. And I had, hundreds and maybe thousands of these photographs pass through my hands. And they're sad to look at, but you can cope with it. It's a business, so you do it. I mean, if you're an undertaker, you don't cry at every body that comes into your facility, for example. But there was one photograph that caught my attention, and this photograph, very strangely, influenced me and started off a whole chain reaction of grief, bereavement, depression. The photograph is here on the front cover of the book. It's of a 18-month-old baby. And when I saw the photograph, uh, it called out to me. And she looked very, very familiar. So I was intrigued. I mean, you don't know who the person is in the photograph. The photograph is, it's a family thing, so nobody puts the name on the back or any information like that. When the last member of the family dies or the photograph is, it's lost or somebody has it or whatever. So 99% of these photographs are completely unidentified. So you come across a photograph that catches your eye, means something to you, calls out to you, reaches you in an astonishing way. Naturally, you're going to ask yourself, who is this person? So I took on the task of trying to find out who the baby was. Now, you've got a photograph which could have been taken anywhere in the world at any time of an infant who didn't live very long and therefore hasn't left much of a record. The infant has never bought a house or been famous or popular or done things. Very, very difficult task indeed. So a lot of people that I know thought that it was a completely stupid thing to do. Spending all your time and your money on an impossible task. Now, I thought to myself, well, I'm a document specialist. I worked as a registrar, and I did a course in internal auditing, which is all about information. The auditors, they're kind of the MI5 and the MI6, the intelligence service, and the police force of the financial world. They look into records and they identify, facts. So I thought I was equipped to do it. Well, at least give it a try, you know. Now I'll give you some idea of what that search involved. I The photograph had a trademark on the bottom, the name of the studio that took the photograph, because I mean people didn't take photographs. Photographs were taken in studios. And this was quite a famous studio, the Gerizé Freres, the Gerizé brothers. And they had their studio in Brussels, in Belgium. So naturally, you assume that the photograph is taken in Belgium and that this child is from a Belgian family. Now, the records for Belgium are held in 3,428 offices. Each office has millions of records. Now, you're talking about 127 million records. So you've got to find one in 127 million. That's an impossible task. And if you don't know the name of the person, or the date of birth, or the address at which they lived, you know, what are you doing? You're looking for a needle in a giant haystack. You're not going to find it. So I didn't know the name of this infant, but on the back of the photograph there was a note that had been written by her father. And it said, a souvenir of our dear little Marthe, who left us on the 23rd of March, 1886. So what I've got is her first name and the date on which she passed away. And the photograph itself, that's all I had. I wanted to buy the photograph. So I went to see the owner, a chap called Paul Frecker. He has fantastic photographs. He buys and sells them. He's an expert in the field. I asked to meet him, and he very graciously met me. And I asked him about the photograph, and I said, "Well, where'd you get it?" He said, I can't really remember, but I think I bought it at a boot sale." I said, "Well, what did you pay for it?" "Oh," he said, £2 or £3. And I said to him, "Look, I'll give you £100 for it." He said, "No, I don't want to sell the photograph." Well, I said, "I'll give you £500. And he said, no, it's one of my favourites." And then I said to him, "Look, I'll give you £1,000 for it." I had to have the photograph. I had to have it. And he said, "It's not for sale at any price." So he's not going to part with it. And so I said to him, "Well, have you ever, wondered who this was?" I mean, the photograph obviously meant a lot to him. He's not going to, he bought it for a couple of quid. He's not going to sell it for £1,000. It's got to mean something to the guy, Excuse me. Anyway, he said, "Well, I did try. I tried for 2 years to see if I could find out anything about her." He said, "But there's nothing." So I said to him, "Well, I'm going to have a try." And he said, "Do me a favor." He said, "If you find out anything about her, let me know." And I said, "Okay, I will." Well, it took me 2.5 years, several £1,000s, and about 800 hours of my time, mostly spent on wasted searches and useless bits of information and God knows what else. Nobody knew anything about Marthe. But, when I was an internal auditor and a registrar, I prided myself on the fact that I'd never lost a case. When I set out to do something, I achieved it. And my employers, the civil service, they noticed this. And they saw me as a bit of a troubleshooter, They would send me in where everybody else had failed. And they said, "Well, Roger can do it. Send Roger. He's the big gun." So I would go into an office, lock everybody down, turn out your pockets, or not really, but you get the message. There would be a complete lockdown when you're going to check the financial records and check the petty cash and make sure that no one's nicking anything. And you could take a transaction, for instance, one of millions, and you could trace it through the system, and find out. About it. And I used to brag. I once bragged to my friends, and I said, I can write a book about a match. Well, they said a match is a match. I mean, what can you say about a match? I said, I'll tell you the tree that it came from. I'll tell you the factory where it was made, where the powder came from. You know, that kind of detail. That's the detail that internal auditors look at. They go into, a small amount of information in a great amount of detail. So I thought that I was equipped to do it, and I succeeded. I actually identified Marthe, and her name was Marthe Esther Clotilde Thiry. And she was born on the 2nd of September 1884, and she died on the 23rd of March 1886. Her father was Charles Hector Thiry, a pharmacist, a medical man. Her mother was Josephine Mathilde Marie Charles, a housewife. Marthe had two older sisters. Emily was born in 1879, but sadly she died on the 30th of January 1879, aged only 17 days. So she never met her sisters. So you can imagine that Mathilde, who has lost a child, this young wife, what her state of mind was. You lose a child, you don't want to lose another child. And mothers and fathers, they lose a child and they kind of blame themselves. It doesn't matter what happened. They always think it's their fault, or they try to blame each other. Helene was born in 1880, and thankfully she survived. I found some census records in 1898. That was the last record for the property where they lived. And Helene was still alive at that time. Marthe, born in 1884, she died. Now you can imagine what Marthe's death did to the mother. She'd already lost one child, and now she lost another. And it is well, I was told that her mother went crazy. She started having problems at the fact that she lost two of her children, as I suppose any mother would be unable to cope with that kind of pressure, and So I wrote the book. The book went out of print. It sold something like 680,000 copies. But being stupid the way I am, I didn't profit from this book either. I gave all the money away to charity. And it cost me about £12,000 to write the book. So I was out of pocket. So my books, my literature, it means more to me than being a writer and earning a living out of it. In fact, I don't think I've made a penny out of my books. So I decided that all the information in this book, this book is paranormal. This Marthe is a spirit, but you don't read in this book. It's not written like a paranormal book, because I thought, if I told people in this book, where the information was coming from, where the motivation was coming from to write it, people would just say, well, the guy's a crackpot, He's saying that a ghost told him all these things, right? So I wrote the book saying, I discovered that. I didn't say where the information came from. Or I got to know this, right? Without saying, the spirit of Marthe came to me and spoke to me and told me this. The spirit of Marthe took me to the house where they lived and showed me the house. The spirit of Marthe showed me the place where you go to when you die. It's called the void. And she told me what happens. And, that there's a fence there and a gate there, and this light comes for you. And she showed me the place and I saw it. Now, you start writing things like that in a book, and people don't take you seriously. So the book is written very professionally, but it doesn't say where the information came from, or it diverts away from the paranormal. And that's not fair. That's really not fair. You've got to be honest and tell people the whole story. So I decided to do a rewrite of this book and to republish it and to admit that it is a paranormal event and that spirits are real and that the information came from the spirit of Marthe. So I updated the book, edited it, and it is republished now as this book, and there's her face on the cover, her name, which again is backwards, I'm sorry about that, Marthe, and my name, the author, Roger Singh. The book is published by Amazon.com. It's quite expensive. This is the hardcover. It's a beautiful book. It's lovely. Look at the binding on it. It is very, very good quality. Much better than the quality of the other books. They're like paperbacks. And I had to buy this copy. These other publishers, they give the author a free copy. Look, here's your book. But Amazon don't. So I had to pay over 40 quid for this book. It really is a very handsome book. It's like a passport. Have you ever noticed how badly passport photos turn out? Yeah. I'll tell you what, if you want to scare your baby, show them this photograph and then terrify them. Okay, so there's a Kindle version for those of you like me who are, very poor. And here's a Kindle, and the Kindle version is only about £5 or something like that. There's a paperback that's being released on the 17th of January, the same release date as this book, and that's about £11, something like that. So, not very expensive. And what I'm going to do, I'd like to read some, excerpts from this book to give you some idea of my writing style, whether or not it's interesting for you. If you're a book fan, you're going to love it, because it's completely off key. It's the paranormal, You've got a guy like me, who's just studied science all his life, and who worked as an internal auditor in the world of finance, and he believes in ghosts. The two things are not compatible. People like me are logical. They rely on facts. You're not going to get someone who's a professional person admitting that they believe in the paranormal. But the truth is the truth, and I accept it, that there really is a paranormal phenomena. Spirits and ghosts are real, and I'm not denying that. I've seen the proof for myself. When you see a chair moving from one end of the room to the other room, the end of the room, right? You know that something's amiss. When you find things missing in the house, like keys or your phone, and you don't know where they've gone, and then a couple of hours later you see them back in the place where you put them. Something's moved them and then put them back. When you hear screams from your kitchen and you live alone and there's no one in the kitchen, you want to know what's going on. I've got a K2, allegedly a spirit meter. It's an EMF meter, right, tuned to the frequency of spirits. It doesn't pick up Radio 4 or anything. And I've seen it go crazy. And then other times there's nothing on it, no reading on it at all. I've heard noises, I've heard singing, and I got myself checked out by a doctor to make sure that I wasn't going nuts. And luckily, it seems that I'm perfectly sane. But that gives you the problem, you see. You know, you're sane, right? But you've got a spirit problem. So how do you deal with that? I'm running out of memory space again, so I'm going to read the excerpts from this book in the next take 3. Okay, see you in a minute. Here we are, part 3, at last. The current book, Marthe, which is available from Amazon.com. In 3 versions. There's the Kindle version for about a fiver, a paperback, which is being released on the 17th of January, which is about £10. And this hardcover, beautifully bound hardcover version, which is quite expensive at 40 quid, and I had to pay for it. There's no free author copy with Amazon. I think it's a very beautiful book. I'm certainly glad I bought it, and even though I know the contents. Before I read you some excerpts from the book, I'm going to mention certain names, and obviously, if you haven't read the book from the beginning, you won't know who these people are, and the story, or whatever part I tell you, won't make much sense. So I'll give you a brief introduction to some of the characters that I'm going to mention. Kerry Godwin. Now, Kerry was a patient at the London Jewish Hospital, and she was 11 years old. And at the same time, I was 10 years old, and I was in the same children's ward, suffering from a very serious attack of rheumatic heart disease. And a lot of kids didn't survive. The main thing was to keep the child absolutely still. So I was flat on my back, not allowed to sit up, not allowed to watch TV or play or anything like that for 8 long months. So I must have been a very boring child at the time. But funny enough, Kerry would come and sit with me and talk to me and kind of give me encouragement. And sadly, Kerry died in the children's ward. So I've always thought that it was very ironic that you've got me, a patient dying of organ failure, wasn't expected to survive, and Kerry, who looked absolutely perfectly healthy, was the one that died in that ward. Now, Marthe's family. Okay, Marthe, you know. Marthe's elder sister was Helene, and round about the time that Marthe died, Helene was about 6 years old. She loved her baby sister, played with her all day long, and treated her like a living doll. And when Marthe died, Helene's world was turned upside down. Emily was the eldest, but she had only lived for 17 days. She died before the others were born, so they never knew her sister Emily. Hector was the father, Marthe's father, and he was a pharmacist, a medical man, what you would call today a chemist. Highly intelligent and did very well for himself. He was quite rich. Mathilde was his wife, Marthe's mother. She'd already lost Emily in 1879, and when it came to Marthe, she just went to pieces. No mother could cope with that, so it must have been a very awful thing for a mother to lose 2 children. Walther Gunther, Hector's lifelong friend. They met at school, and it was a friendship that lasted well into their adult years. Charles Hector Thiry became a pharmacist, and Walther became a doctor. And he lived round the corner from the family, so he was their GP. This other person, Renee, imagine a plump housekeeper nanny, fussing over Charles Hector Thiry, bringing him up, basically, and to Charles Hector, she was his mother. He loved her, and she knew him. She knew him better than his own mother did. She knew what was in his head at any time. She was the one that wiped his nose and put ointment on his bruised knees, and straightened his tie when he was going to go out and meet somebody. Uh, that kind of person, and Hector loved her immensely, and of course to Renee, he was her son. Okay, so let's have a little read. I don't know why I told Kerry about my nightmare, and then about the fear I had of dying. The tears in my eyes betrayed just how scared I was, and how convinced and frightened I was that death was coming for me. I remember that Kerry laughed. "You're silly," said Kerry with a grin. "You're not going to die." Kerry's voice was full of confidence. "Look, you're going to get well, and then you'll go home to your mum and dad, and you'll be all right. You wait and see." And Kerry gave me a teasing smile. "You know, my mum thinks that you're a girl because you've got long hair." "I've got long hair because I'm a Sikh," I said. And I said, "I am a boy." From around that time onwards, it seemed that all Kerry wanted to talk about was me getting better and going home safe and sound. Kerry gave me hope to believe that I would be all right, and it was that reassurance that kept me going in those dark and scary days. There's a lot more about Kerry in the book, but I'm going to jump forwards and read you the next bit. Oh yes, this is I wrote to the head archivist of one of the offices in Belgium, asking him if he could help me to trace Marthe. I told him what information I had, and this was his reply. "The archive records are filed by surname, and there are 3,458 parishes in Belgium. Without a place of residence or a family name, and given that you do not even know such basic information for a search spanning over a century and a quarter, you are looking for a tiny needle in a giant haystack. What records once existed may have become lost, misfiled, or moved. Ancient records are liable to such losses quite easily." Excuse me. "Given that they've been around for so long, they might be lost in a fire, a water accident, damaged, stolen, or simply sent away to the wrong place and then forgotten and left there. There is no guarantee that Marthe's family lived in Wallonia. There are many areas that speak French, and there are French-speaking families in areas that traditionally speak Flemish, Dutch, or German. It is also possible that his family may have moved to Belgium from France, or even from somewhere else. In that case, there might be no records at all, because these might have been sent to their country of origin, because they were citizens of that country." I think I've got 2 pages of one, 3. Oh yeah. "There is no guarantee that the deceased child was buried in Belgium after her untimely death. She may have been repatriated to her native land for burial. I'm sorry to give you such disappointing news. We cannot help you any further. Good luck in your research, but I'm afraid that the task which you are facing is impossible." I think I would have said the same thing, as a registrar, if somebody had written to me and told me that. All right. Okay, here we go. "I looked at the hundreds of cabinets with thousands of drawers, each containing hundreds of microfilm cassettes. There were rows and rows of cabinets, millions of indexes, each filed by surname from A to Z, and only by region. I looked at the labels bearing the names of the countries civil regions on each cabinet: Namur, Liege, Mans, Louvain. There were almost 3,500 different locations in those regions where state archives were kept. Let me carry on read a little bit more. The task was impossible. It was hopeless, with around 127 million records just sitting in these offices. And then there were the other large offices at St. Hubert to consider. Copies of records from this office were held here at Anderlecht, and if we went through every record here, perhaps 25 years later, we could start on the search at St. Hubert. Gives you some idea of the extent of the search. And in Maine, the book is about the search. All right, okay. This is interesting because I went for a coffee, and they've got these pavement bistros in Belgium, much like they do in France. And there were a lot of people there, and I was sitting at a table by myself, and this man in this colonial suit, a white suit and a colonial hat, came and asked me if he could sit there, and I said happy to. And it turned out he was quite an important man. He was the MP for the local area, and so he asked me what I was doing in Belgium, and I said I'm working. Right, here we go. And my girlfriend had gone off to buy another drink. She decided to get another drink for herself and left. While she was gone, a man dressed in a light-coloured suit asked me if anyone was sitting at my table and if he could join me. It turned out that he was a diplomat and had a good knowledge of the area around the Thiry house and the Rue des Bouchers. We had a conversation about Marthe, and the first thing he told me was that he doubted that there was a grave to find for Marthe. He told me that it depended upon what concession that Hector had bought for his child's grave. When the concession expired, the grave would be dug up and the remains disposed of. I asked him what happened to the remains, where they ended up. Landfill, he replied, in the rubbish. He also told me that one of the two remaining churches, it was no good trying St. James. That building was fairly recent, built in around 1930, so they would not have any records for Marthe. He suggested that I try St. Nicholas, the last church on my list, as this was the parish church for the Rue des Bouchers, and my best chance for any information about Marthe's parish records. He gave me his telephone number and wished me the best of luck, and shook my hand warmly. "Thank you for what you are doing for Marthe," he said. Thank you? I was surprised. Why would he thank me? Marthe was a Belgian child. She was one of our beloved citizens, and you are helping her. So thank you. I really hope that you are not too late, and that you will find her. Okay, here we got in another bit. She won't be at the fair today, said Renee. She's not very well at the moment. I came from there only this morning. Oh, said Hector, that's very disappointing. Wait, I have an idea. She asked me to call the pharmacy to bring her something from the pharmacy. You're a pharmacist now, so do you know anything about There was a short silence as Renee hesitated. For what malady, my dear Renee? You must tell me the name of the problem so that I can treat it. Renee blushed. Women's problems. I'm sorry I can't say it out loud. So I'll tell you in your ear. Charles Hector walked up to the housekeeper and listened. He gave her a grin. I've got just the stuff for that. But I can't just waltz over there unannounced. Oh, my goodness, no. Of course not. I must go with you. Let me get my cloak. Hector felt the butterflies flittering in his stomach. He wasn't sure if he could face the enormous challenge of seeing Mathilde. She meant so much to him. If anything went wrong with the visit, even a word out of place, it would ruin him for life. "Renee," he said, slightly anxious, "do you think it's all right for me to go there? I mean, do you really think that it's a good idea?" "Master Charles, if I don't do this for you now, I may never come up with the courage to do it again. Now just you keep this in mind. Don't be apprehensive. That will only make you tongue-tied. And she will be in her bed. So best manners and professional behavior. You're going there as a pharmacist, and that's all. I'll give you a few moments alone, and you can try your luck with whatever you men have up your sleeve. Now stop fidgeting with your hands in your pockets and come with me." "Yes, Renee. My dearest Renee, what would I have ever done without you?" They walked some distance, Charles Hector thinking how much energy Renee had at her age. So, Hector's meeting Mathilde for the first time. She looked at him up and down quickly. Once more, he looked every bit the perfect gentleman. In his chest, his heart started beating fast. He walked through the heavy doors, through delicate lace curtains, and there, sitting upright in bed, was the woman of his dreams. She took his breath away. Renee announced, "Mathilde, my dear, this is Monsieur Charles Hector Thiry. He has just qualified as a pharmacist from the University of Namur." "Please do come in, monsieur. I've heard a lot about you." "Madame Charles, I am honored. I am at your service." He loved her voice. It was silky soft and her features rosy and delicate. Her eyes were breathtakingly beautiful, like twin pools of bright blue. She had a perfect, heart-shaped face with a pointed chin, and there was an air of unreal calmness about her. It was like meeting an angel from God's own heaven and falling in love with its beauty. His heart practically tripping over itself, and his head spinning slightly, he set about his business. He had just the stuff for nerves, but decided he couldn't use it out of sheer embarrassment. Hector opened his valise and took out some papers and some small glass bottles. He had sufficient presence of mind not to drop any. That would have meant disaster, and the rug on the floor looked pretty expensive. "What have you heard about me, mademoiselle?" "That you heal the sick well," she said. "Oh, that would be Madame Potiguier," he said. "And how is she these days?" "She is well, and she said that you are a very kind-hearted man." "You're the one that's being very kind, madame, I assure you," he replied modestly. "And actually, I also have to admit that you are in fact my first professional patient." "Oh, then I must ask if you know that you are sure you know what you're doing." "That I wondered to myself a great many times," said Hector with a laugh. "An educated man with a sense of humour," she said, smilingly. "Monsieur Thiry is full of surprises." "Ah, I believe that this will relieve Madame of the problem," said Hector, producing a small bottle. He turned to Renee and asked for a spoon, giving her a wink. To his horror, she winked back, and he immediately wondered if Mathilde had noticed it. After Renee had gone, there was a brief silence, which was broken by Mathilde. "I was just thinking, Monsieur Thiry." "About what is the madame thinking?" "Where I have seen you before." "I don't believe that we have met before, madame. Perhaps it was in a strange dream." Now Mathilde had had a dream and seen a man, but didn't see his face, and when he said perhaps it was in a strange dream, it suddenly hit her. He had no idea why the expression on the face of Mathilde would suddenly change at that moment. She quickly collected herself and asked, I am sorry. Have I said something wrong, madame? No, no, absolutely not, said Mathilde quickly. I was just thinking, perhaps I met you during my visit to France. Were you ever in Paris? No, madame, I have never been further afield, I'm afraid. Then you must really go, said Mathilde, cheering up a little. There are such beautiful sights to see there. Hector gave her a winning smile. One does not have to go to Paris to see a beautiful sight, madame. The parents heard the excitement upstairs as both little girls realized that Papa was home. Mathilde smiled at him and said into the air, "Don't rush, girls. Be careful on the stairs." In his hand, Hector had the doll that he had bought for Marthe. Mathilde smiled broadly as the girls came running downstairs. Marthe was so very excited that she could barely hold on to the handrail, taking one step at a time as she usually did. But from the third step, she suddenly fell and slid onto the bottom of the first step face down. Both parents rushed to pick the little girl up. Mathilde got there first. Both parents expected the child to sit up crying, but to their surprise, she didn't move. "Marthe!" Mathilde quickly picked up her child and cuddled her. Marthe's body was completely limp, and her eyes were rolling as if in a fit. Helene stood there, speechless and afraid. I didn't push her, Mama. I didn't," she said. "It's all right, darling," said her mother anxiously. "Come down from the stairs and stand here next to me." She gently rubbed Marthe's forehead and called Marthe her name a few times, but the child did not respond. "Oh, no," Mathilde murmured. "Oh, God, no." Hector looked on in shock at what had happened. Now he moved forward. He dropped the doll. He touched little Marthe's neck and felt her pulse. He placed his ear over her mouth. "She's breathing and she's got a pulse." His voice was tense and urgent. "She's probably just having a convulsion because she's teething." He touched Marthe's forehead and felt for fever, but her temperature seemed normal. "Hector, go find Walter, quickly." Mathilde cradled her child and held the little girl tightly against her chest. She started whispering words of comfort to her baby, telling her that she would be all right. Hector burst out of the house and ran down the street, passing people and pushing them aside as he got to Walter's house on the Rue des Petits. He started shouting loudly for Walter. Walter was in the middle of his supper when Hector started banging on the door. Annoyed, his wife went to see who it was, and when she saw the state that Hector was in, she knew that something was terribly wrong. Walter got up from the table as Hector burst in. "Good grief, Hector! What is it?" "It's Papillon," said Hector, out of breath. "Marthe, please hurry." Walter grabbed his hat and coat, and they rushed out into the street. As the two men walked at a very brisk pace, Walter breathing a little noisily, he asked what happened. I don't know. She just collapsed on the stairs." "Did she hit her head?" "No, I don't think so." Hector's voice was trembling. "Did you check? Did you see any blood, a head wound?" No, I thought perhaps she had a fit because she's teething, but she doesn't have a fever." "Then it's not a febrile convulsion?" "No, I don't think so." They soon reached the house. Hector had left the door open, and they rushed quickly inside. Mathilde was sat on the couch, still cradling her baby tightly to her chest, moaning quietly. Walter went up to Marthe and looked at the child's face, which had turned pale. He noticed that her lips had turned dark, and she had tiny beads of sweat on her forehead. This told him straight away that the child was in shock and not breathing properly. He opened each eyelid in turn and looked at the pupils. He took Marthe's pulse and spent a few moments thinking. Then he went over to Hector and beckoned him into the back room. Walter lit his pipe and pulled at it a few times. He always did that when he was thinking. Hector was subdued and quiet. He waited patiently for Walter to talk. I'm afraid it's serious, old man. She's had some kind of damage to the brain, probably a stroke. A stroke? How is that possible? Said Hector. She wasn't hypertensive. The right eye is not responding to light, ergo brain damage. There's no sign of any physical injury to her head, so the damage is internal. I think that's why she had those headaches. But it doesn't look good. How serious is it? Well, she's struggling to breathe and her heartbeat is quite apace. I would say that it's probably on the top end of serious. I can't be optimistic. Hector looked around the room in disbelief. His voice shook with emotion. But she was fine. She was so happy, playing and talking. I bought her the doll. Strokes can strike at any time without warning, said Walter. One man last year was driving a locomotive, suffered a stroke, brought on instant paralysis, and the train ploughed into a whole group of people at a street crossing, and then went on to smash into the back of another train, killing 14 more people. Hector shook his head. Will she survive? Walter took the pipe from his mouth, tapped out the tobacco, took out a pouch from his inside pocket, and started to fill the pipe slowly. Right side of the brain controls the heart. If she gets into cardiac arrhythmia, she will arrest, and that will be the end. He turned to face Hector and looked purposefully into his eyes. On the other hand, if she manages to pull through, it might be even worse. Hector stared at his friend in disbelief. Wait a minute. What are you saying? Walter lit his pipe and took a few puffs. If she recovers, she will probably have total paralysis of the left side of her body. Perhaps loss of speech, possibly vision. More problems than that too, I would imagine. Hector stared at Walter in horror as he continued. Heart, digestion, respiration, mental faculties not functioning normally. Not a very nice life, Hector, for anyone, let alone your child. Hector slumped into a chair and ran his hands through his face. He sat there a while and stared at the wall in front of him. Take the child from the mother and put her in bed, Hector. There's nothing more to be done, if she survives. Hector nodded. His face wore an expression of grief. Walter opened the door into another room, and as he did so, he turned back to face Hector. It would be better for the child not to wake up, he said. Hector, do you understand? Well, I'm going to leave it there and leave you in suspenders. So that's my review, and I thought it was interesting, and I'm certainly quite shocked that the paranormal is real. I tell you something, right? You see chairs moving from one end of the room to the other, you believe it. You hear screams from the kitchen, which you record on a phone, right? And the screams are on the phone. You know the screams are real. A few weeks ago, every clock in the house stopped at the same time. Every clock. At the same time. Things would disappear and then turn up where I put them. All these kind of things. I've seen things, moving by themselves, and that's why I thought I was crazy and had myself checked out. I've got some videos on YouTube where I've actually posted the videos, and you can see for yourself. It's very hard to believe, but it's true. The paranormal is real. Marthe communicated with me through dreams because that apparently doesn't require much effort or much energy on the part of the spirit. And she told me things that later turned out to be true because I found the documents and verified what she told me. And that's what the book's about. The book is about the search for Marthe and about the paranormal aspect of that. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you'd like to know Marthe's story, the book is available. And thanks again. Bye-bye. Okay, there's some text on the back which describes the contents of the book, and I'll just read them. This is a true story of an incredible search for a mysterious unknown infant in a very old Victorian photograph. When I saw her photograph, I appeared to recognize her. How was that possible? To answer that question, I had to find out who she was. And that, my friends, was easier said than done. After all, how do you find the person in a photograph taken somewhere in the world over a century ago? That is what made the search for Marthe unique. And once she was found, it seems that she was more than a deceased infant. The bold text says this: I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits until my life was changed by an old photograph. At first, I thought that I was going crazy. I went to see a doctor, and the doctor told me that I wasn't crazy. Marthe was real, and now I believe in the paranormal. If you want to know the whole story, this book was written for you. Okay,